This is the most radical brain disease. It calls for a strange cinematic realization. Superficial Life, Thinking of Schizophrenia by David Barrett. Introduction. Beginnings are where most possibility lies. So I'm thinking, by way of a beginning, allow me an imaginative analogy. Try to picture this. Your mind is colonial. You, in other words, are a force occupying my aboriginal writing. Strange cinema, schizophrenic cinema, is heterogeneous and cannot be identified as a unified theme. It is, after all, the story of a disease. But to reverse a saying, all that dies must once have lived. What brains degenerate must somehow first have formed. Too dark of a note to begin on? If this you think, you haven't an idea of the darkness the sufferer of this dread bane faces. 3. Cinema is a tunnel into a dimension that no longer exactly exists. But what does exist? I may need not explain what schizophrenia is. People have their own glimmer of an idea, even if these are as crazily off as psychosis is itself. Indeed, why tell you when I can show you? If the truth be known, I am a sufferer of this quote-unquote mental illness, this brain disease, so anything and everything I write or am no doubt bears its marks. 4. Consciousness is a structure held by brain forces. We must reinterpret our intuition of ourselves. The title was first to be Superficial Persons, for reasons that may come clear. This could have made one wonder. Superficial persons? Was I implying that the mentally ill are somehow shallow? That we are less deep or real than the healthy? Not exactly, or perhaps not. For now, I thought, let's not compare us in a simplistic hierarchical scheme. Do we know anything about the mind? It is removed. It escapes. Yet, it moves in like fashion. Let's say I was suggesting that persons, the phenomena of personality, are themselves somehow superficial entities, though not in the sense of fake. Disease itself is deep, let alone the being it affects. Being, which is the most profound thing we can conceive of, besides deity. 6. The most important thing is one's writing. It gets you everything, though is at first only for you. 7. The coming to be of awareness parallels the coming to be of conscious writing. However, like a mirror which is only flat, but can appear quite voluminous, depending what is in front of it. A person, as we know her, is but the thinnest layer of the being, or reality, that is her full being. And persons aren't just reflective, mirroring what observers wish, but rather are transparent, letting deeper core levels have causal influence, though not always direct evidentiary traces. 8. What is the theme of a film? How would one prepare for oncoming psychosis? By learning. The title is partial intent to provoke thought, a cognitive dissonance in the audience. Persons superficial, how dare you? Or, I know some superficial persons also. External behavior, the fairly ritualized acts and interacts as which others see us, has deep-seated roots. But what we can normally observe of selves at any one time are the most ephemeral or ambiguous of moments. Though there is a fractal involution, a transparency or lucidity of levels that allows sight of deep structure at times. In a fractal, a similar level of complexity is seen, no matter the magnification the structure is viewed at. 9. Minds need to transform. They need to key into what they could be changing into. If core events cause peripheral expression, by seeing this, you, in a way, can see the core. I'm not, of course, saying core equals special and periphery equals flimsy wrapping. For does it really matter which is which? Core, periphery, periphery, core? How do you know the more important? We are both. Perhaps we can say of postmodern thought that, in it, distinctions are problematized. This means they say it is at least questionable to say X is different than Y, no matter what the X, no matter what the Y. 10. Do you ever do what you wish? Can time be wasted? Maybe you should be mixed up. If the world is homogeneous, or at least made of strings or points or something, then everything in a way would be the same, of the same essence. And it matters less what it's called. Calling everything something is seemingly not different from saying all is water, like some of the ancients do, but perhaps is the most meaningless, though if true, profound statement you could make, saying all is X is valuable simply as a thought experiment. To make this concrete, we could take, for instance, nociception, what neuroscientists call pain perception, and think of it as a model for all perception. Perception as actually nociception, in other words. For a few moments, imagine you were a hypochondriac and every one of your sensations is painful. This is an interesting exercise and may help you to one day get more pleasure out of your senses. 11. Craziness is very subtle, hard to understand when it's happening to you. It doesn't feel crazy. 12. Of your senses. There are unique things about pain. People can live with all of their senses intact, but tragically be missing nociception. It is a life-threatening lack, of course, but it is possible. I wonder if pain perception is a fundamental category which can be present or absent. Why isn't pleasure also? Is pleasure instead relative, a matter of taste? Does it require something like aesthetic cultivation of the neural apparatus? Do lower organisms not feel it? Maybe pleasure isn't a basic type of mental information, because you could live an albeit depressing life with no pleasure, but it is dangerous to go without pain. 12. What is reality? All the sinister themes are connected. Pain is akin to nervous information, so is pleasure like knowledge? As you grow older, you may find that, like for me, sensations themselves become or are naturally seen to be pleasurable, as in there is nothing more to go for but the sight of shadows on the wall, the sound of a far-off lawnmower and some chirping birds, the feel of computer keys under your hands, the weight of your body, etc. I guess this could be called empirical pleasure. Rational pleasure would, on the other hand, probably be an elevated form of it, like something felt when inventing philosophy. 13. Psychopath or paragon of virtue? Choose good over evil. You decide. You decide. You decide. You decide. You decide. 14. Are you burning fat now? Can you wait a minute? How should you call us? 15. Depersonalization, faulty memory, lethality, misery. All of this is common in schizophrenia. 16. Psychosis is lucid. You do not fade out. All tools are dangerous, including language. This may sound twisted or masochistic, but one of the highest, most rational pleasures I've known was the phenomenon of depersonalization, or ego loss, in connection with delirium during a recent flu, and originally years ago in an acid trip. It wasn't fun while it was happening, but after it was over, I kind of missed it. How could being no one be good? As a thinker, you have to ask yourself the most radical questions. If you don't, who will? Like, what could ego loss's meaning be? Can you lose something which is supposedly always there? Or is it instead not the most sublime awareness to see the total constructionality, constructedness, and historical basis inherent in our every thought? "17. It can speak in your own voice, But if you don't believe in something, why do it? 18. Go for goals, not because of impulse drive. This is putting life to task. I had no thoughts of my own still contains I and my own, a contradiction in terms. No thoughts during this loss were personal. They were all wrapped in others' voices. You may ask, what is a thought, but what is in your mind? But what was in my mind was merely externally caused. I had no internal causation or creativity. Rather, I had will. I could move around. But my visual sense was the only sense which gave myself a sense of me. 19. Creation is a key word. We are dealing with a matrix, clinical or not. 20. Is a psychotic text possible? Maybe you did choose this. 21. You have to decide what life signifies to you. Use different words if your previous ones haven't worked. 22. Maybe you aren't focusing. I thought you wanted to write the heaviest book. 23. Dream or nightmare, you decide. 24. The best thinker would act with his philosophy. For me, I comforted myself with the saying, the eyes are the most sensitive openings into the soul. This made me think that passive senses, like visuality, must be more basic than language or mentality. Plenty of organisms have sight, but do not have language. Although vision seems very colorful and complex, it may in fact be more primitive, or if you don't like that word, more necessary than language. And less necessary than anything else in the brain may be personality itself. I've come to suspect selfhood is an epiphenomenon, something that floats above the real functional operations of the brain. Another way of thinking this is to say a person is determined, not determinate. It is an effect, not a cause. For the self to be determinate, you would think there would have to be an origin to it, a source. But origins, the embryonic, genetic evolution of the species, or ontogenetic growth of the individual, origins of the self are relative, or lost in time, or gradually reduced back to zero the closer to conception you look. In other words, how can the I have willpower when to have power requires an origin, a causal connection, and no self-origin is apparent? It's quite philosophical to talk about the decentering or absence of the self, but good for us, I think. For in our travels, some of us run into the postmodernisms. There is no subject, or the subject is dead. But these are incoherent ideas. They don't mesh with reality. Of course there are subjects, selves. However, it may be proper to say the subject is more of an appearance than reality. Think of the child, the newborn, awash in a sea of language, none of which is its own. Perhaps not being cognitively, linguistically developed, it would not matter as much that none of the language going through your head was your own. Though babies cry a fair amount, I wonder how many of these growing pains are physical, and how many mental. So perhaps, because one can lose one's ego doesn't mean one never had ego. And because one once had no self doesn't mean one can never develop selfhood. In fact, wouldn't we escape a blind absolutism by saying, indeed, that the ego is a developmental phenomenon, not an essential one? And if we are saying the ego is developmental, I think we can also say life is developmental. That particular growth may be our ultimate aim, to examine our lives and struggle, if we can, to avoid superficial ones, to attain something like depth or meaningfulness in this one certain time on earth. Chapter 1. Mind-oriented, mentally originary. If fancy strikes, you may truly say, there is a mountain in my head. Because if you look at it philosophically, and trust me, you should, everything we know is mind-oriented. For how do we actually know or become aware of anything but through the instrument of our own mind's action, its faculties of apprehension, as Kant might say? It is not as if we ever escape ourselves and reach outside the brain, and it is not as if anything we know magically appears in our heads and does not arise because of causal influences of the environment, or perhaps genetics, when instinct is involved. In this view, the world is a self-made thing. It is like a mirror, a big surround version of ourselves, reflecting back to us only what we are capable of thinking real, but not exactly. We learn new things. The world can show us things we've never seen, impossible for a true mirror. This analogy functions, but is not literal, because it could be backwards. We could be the mirror, a sort of blank surface for life to inscribe its scriptures upon, and for other people to then read them off. You may sense something missing. It can be only this, consciousness. Perhaps as mere brain machines, we would be nothing but surfaces. But the thing called mind gives us depth somehow as great as the greatest height we have ever seen of the nighttime sky. It gives our inner lives complexity that can grasp or create or play with the most highly textured symphonic music we could hear. For picture any picture, no matter how complex a vision you have just summoned, it's probably only the merest fragment of brain power making it exist. All the complex and amazing looking crowds you have ever been in were simply models in your mind of things ephemeral and sublime. This is why the self itself is quite a phenomenon if you grapple with it for prolonged times, and if you interfere with it by psychosis mimicking psychotomimetic drugs like LSD, you are assuming a right to alter the most profound entity or being you can know. Experimentality is the lifeblood of many writers, but the more experimental you are in your speculation, the further off and wrong necessarily some will be. Now hopefully, if you survive, your ultimate theories will approach originality or truth. Recommendations to be experimental are often taken to an extreme. In my case, for instance, it all made me who I am today, but I have been insane, so I'm semi-confused about whether it is a good thing to be this way or not. Don't get me wrong. If you alter your mind, you can, some say, never go back. I myself have been so far down alteration's path, and it can seem like so much struggle to return, that I'm mostly at peace here. But unless you want to vastly increase your risk of a psychotic break, mental hospitals, expensive antipsychotic medicine with many side effects every day for the rest of your life, I would certainly avoid drugs stronger than pot, and even that can tip some minds over the edge. So why not be thankful you have a brain in the first place, and forget about trading it for a synthetic new one through drug use? In any case, The self is quite a piece of work, and the whole world, in a sense, can fit within it. As this is true of all selves, there are billions of worlds in this world. Walking in a crowd and imagining the parallel subjectivities is mind-boggling. Each person with a different perspective, all as colorful and real and intense as any other to a certain degree. Maturity level or intelligence quotient may give added twists to how you are interpreting your life world, the phenomenal reality of mind. But if you think back, you may be reluctant to say you are a qualitatively different entity at 30 years old than you were at 10. This similarity within self makes me project a similarity across others. In fact, observation of animals even leads some to guess that just about anything capable of consciousness must have a spirit like ours. This is why education or learning is important, because the more we know, the more we can perceive. The real is the made. It means that if you, for instance, don't know the laws of physics, you may not be able to fire a projectile at the angle that will take it farthest. Or if you don't know a bit about philosophy, you may be paralyzed and uncomfortable when someone criticizes you, instead of reacting with a more balanced, overt or covert defense mechanism. Finally, when you look at the globe, if you do not know about life, you will not be able to clearly imagine which world you see. The mind, like an instrument, needs to be practiced and practiced. It can and does become stronger with use, like muscle. It is up to your imagination to invent its uses in your lives, for no one can a prioritize these. No one can rightly say in advance of the action what the best uses a creature like yourself should put yourself to. Chapter 2. Anti-horizons, the focus of the world, obscenity impinged upon by all. I often think of horizons, the limits of the seeable. So when today I turned my attention to the self, I thought to characterize it as an anti-horizon, the speck in the middle of a big horizon circle to give an image. If you want to think big, the self, being at a point, is the focus indirectly of the energies of potentially an entire world. The all can be said to impinge upon or touch and manipulate in many ways the subsidiary, the self of ours. Like it or not, circulation of capital and labor characterizes life on Earth. Those with brain diseases are often part of a curious experiment in social engineering. To keep some safe from the circulation, they are given disability income, which is administered by Social Security in America. You may ask, shouldn't everyone chip into the great flux that is society, the market? It would be nice if we all could, but for several reasons it is inadvisable. For instance, the stress inherent in participatory economics might cause sufferers of mental illness undue misery with any number of, lethal or not, negative consequences. Or, since schizophrenics are often very susceptible to verbal suggestion, they could be vulnerable to being exploited by employers who, after all, come from the entire ethical spectrum of citizens. I have used disability time to hone my thinking and writing. This is the type of contribution I want to make to a greater good. And since Social Security isn't enough money to live at my perceived comfort level, I am feeling by this point the capitalist pressure to achieve independent income with my conatus or effort. This is a different sort of writing than I did for the other time I've been an adult. I've written many things in school, and to be put open on the internet, where one is of course free to say however and whatever one wants. There is a sense of power in that. But now I've decided to write for the public market, and my style has spontaneously changed. I have to rein in my powers and focus them in a different, more subtle way, become aligned to the vectors of good taste and circumscription, so to speak. For instance, this could be thought an exoteric book, not serious philosophy. Philosophers make text fairly challenging because they are approaching the world's most difficult problems. Normal people, on the other hand, lay people, as you are known to philosophers, would like books a shade less esoteric than the maximum level a writer can make. But we all want to learn the big questions, the important problems. Theory, in other words. I once strove for theory so original it would, like in Orwell's 1984, be considered thought crime by the powers that be. But now I'm not as sure, for the ultimate revolution, as far as I can see, would be to convince society to stop, to persuade the reproduction to end, to halt history's march as soon as all of us alive had lived our lives. Of course this would never happen, at least with rational methods. But even if I could do it, is it such a noble goal? Instead, why not let the anarchy of world civilization reign on for a long time? Let the world go on its merry or miserable way forever after, without the interference of philosophers who think it is not justified in doing so. The justice of the world, if you examine the matter, changes the world, and changes our very conceptions of what the good and virtue should be. How it could be otherwise, I do not know.